"I won't sit next to him," Victoria Langford said, loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. The words did not explode. They landed colder than that, flat and polished like a glass set down too hard on marble. For 1 second, everything inside Flight 218 to New York seemed to stop at once. The soft click of seat belts, the rustle of boarding passes, the low hum of overhead air, even the tired baby two rows back who had been fussing against his mother's shoulder. Victoria stood in the aisle wearing a cream wool coat that looked too expensive to wrinkle, one hand resting on the handle of her carry-on, the other holding a phone with a black card tucked behind its clear case. Her perfume moved ahead of her before she did, sharp and floral, filling the narrow space between the leather seats. She stared at the man seated by the window as if he were an error printed on her ticket. Marcus Reed looked up slowly. He was a black man in his early 40s, broad-shouldered but quiet, wearing a faded navy jacket, clean jeans, and brown shoes that had clearly walked through more airports than boardrooms. A canvas bag rested under the seat in front of him. In his lap was a worn leather notebook, his thumb holding a page marked with careful handwriting. He had not spoken. He had not taken up her space. He had simply existed in the seat printed on his boarding pass. Victoria glanced at the number above the row, then back at him, her lips tightening. "There must be a mistake," she said, turning toward the flight attendant with the calm arrogance of someone used to mistakes being corrected in her favor. "I booked first class." Claire Bennett, the senior flight attendant, kept her smile professional, though something in her eyes flickered. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 2B. This is 2A. Both seats are assigned correctly." Victoria did not lower her voice. "Then move me." A man in a charcoal suit across the aisle looked down at his phone, pretending not to listen. A college student near the front paused with one earbud halfway in. 2 rows behind, an older woman slowly removed her reading glasses. The cabin had become a room full of witnesses trying not to become witnesses. Marcus closed his notebook with care, not fast, not angry, just gently, as if refusing to let her rush his dignity. He looked at Victoria, then at the empty seat beside him. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, steady, southern around the edges, "you're welcome to sit down." That made her laugh once, short and dry. "That is exactly the problem." Claire stepped slightly between them. "Mrs. Langford, we do have a full cabin today. I can check after boarding is complete, but right now I need everyone seated so we can depart on time." Victoria's eyes sharpened at the sound of her name, as though recognition should have solved everything. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. Claire inhaled quietly. Marcus looked back toward the window. Outside, a luggage cart rolled across the gray runway under a sky the color of wet steel. "I know you're holding up the plane," he said. Not loud, not cruel, just true. A small silence followed. Victoria's face changed, not much but enough. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers curled around the handle of her bag. She leaned closer to Claire, but her words were still meant for the whole cabin. "I paid thousands of dollars for this seat. I did not pay to be made uncomfortable." Marcus turned from the window then. The afternoon light touched one side of his face, showing the calm there, and beneath it, the weariness of a man who had heard different versions of the same sentence his entire life. "I don't need your comfort," he said. "I need you to understand this seat was never yours to take from me." The cabin went completely still. Somewhere behind them, the college student's phone tilted upward, its camera quietly waking. Victoria saw it too late. Her eyes moved from Marcus to the phone, then back to Claire, and for the first time her confidence cracked into something sharper. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Your airline is going to hear about this." Marcus opened his notebook again, his hand resting on the first page where no one else could see the printed heading beneath his notes. Aurelian Air Partnership Ethics Review. He did not explain. He did not threaten. He simply looked out the window as the engines deepened beneath the floor, while Victoria Langford stood in the aisle, unaware that the man she refused to sit beside was the one person she could not afford to offend. Victoria finally sat down, but she did it as if the seat itself had insulted her. She lowered herself into 2B without looking at Marcus, placing her carry-on under the seat with a sharp little push and pulling her coat tight around her knees. Claire moved down the aisle, helping the last passenger settle. Yet the air around row 2 stayed colder than the rest of the cabin. Marcus felt the weight of glances touching the side of his face and then sliding away. He knew that kind of looking. It was the kind people gave when they felt sorry for you but did not want the trouble of standing beside you. He had learned to survive it long before first class, long before airports, long before men and women in tailored clothes decided which rooms he belonged in. He grew up in Southwest Atlanta, in a brick apartment building where the summer heat pressed through the walls, and the air conditioner worked only when it felt generous. His mother, Denise Reed, cleaned offices at night and ironed uniforms in the morning until her hands smelled faintly of starch and lemon soap. His father had driven city buses for 31 years and could name every street by the sound the tires made after rain. They had not raised Marcus to bow his head. They had raised him to keep it level. Not high with arrogance, not low with shame, just level enough to see the truth in front of him. When he was 9 years old, he built paper airplanes from grocery receipts and launched them from the balcony, adjusting the folds until they stopped diving too soon. By 12, he was reading old flight manuals from the public library. By 26, he was an aerospace engineer with a badge around his neck and a desk in a building where people still asked if he was there to fix the lights. He had spent years making himself undeniable, and still there were always people like Victoria Langford, people who could reduce a lifetime of discipline to one glance at his skin and his jacket. The plane began to move, slow at first, then steadier as it rolled away from the gate. Marcus rested his hand on the notebook again, feeling the soft crack in the leather near the spine. It had belonged to his wife, Elena. She used to carry it everywhere, filling the pages with reminders, grocery lists, little quotes, and sketches of clouds seen from airplane windows. Elena had loved flying. She said the sky made every city look innocent from above. 3 years earlier, a preventable mechanical failure had taken her life on a regional flight outside Denver. And after the hearings, after the apologies written by lawyers, after the settlement he never wanted, Marcus left engineering and became an independent aviation safety consultant. He no longer designed systems. He investigated the people who ignored them. That was why he was on this flight. In New York, Aurelian Air was preparing to announce a public partnership with Langford Couture, an $80 million campaign about dignity, access, and modern travel. Marcus had been hired quietly by the airline board to review not only the safety optics of the campaign, but the ethical risk of attaching their name to Victoria Langford. Her company looked beautiful from a distance. Scholarship dinners, magazine covers, speeches about opportunity, polished videos of Victoria smiling beside young interns from communities she would never visit without photographers. But Marcus had already read the complaints. Former employees describing coded language in hiring meetings. Designers of color pushed out and replaced after their work was used. Settlement agreements sealed behind friendly press releases. Nothing loud enough to destroy her. Enough to make him look closer. And now beside him, the woman herself sat with her arms folded, staring forward while pretending he was not there. Marcus turned one page in his notebook. The paper made a dry whisper beneath the engine hum. He wrote only 3 words. Observed in person. Victoria noticed the movement. Her eyes flicked toward the page, then away. She did not know what he was writing, but something about his calm seemed to disturb her more than anger would have. Outside the window, the runway lights stretched into thin gold lines. The engines rose deep and steady beneath their feet. As the plane lifted into the gray afternoon, Marcus looked down at the city shrinking below and thought of Elena's voice, gentle but firm, telling him not to let cruel people teach him cruelty. He breathed once, slowly, and kept his pen in his hand. Victoria Langford had built her entire life around entrances. She knew how to step into a room so people noticed the coat first, the diamond second, and the woman last, only after they had already decided she was important. In boardrooms, hotel ballrooms, charity galas, and television studios, she moved like the world had been arranged in advance for her comfort. Even now, 30,000 feet above the ground, she kept her chin lifted and her shoulders squared, refusing to let the embarrassment in row 2 touch her posture. Her company, Langford Couture, had started as a small boutique in Boston and grown into a luxury fashion empire with glass-front stores in Manhattan, Beverly Hills, Miami, and Chicago. Magazine profiles called her fearless. Business hosts called her visionary. At fundraisers, she spoke softly about equality, while cameras caught the perfect angle of her hand resting over her heart. She knew which words made donors lean forward. Inclusion, opportunity, dignity, belonging. They looked beautiful printed in gold letters across campaign banners, especially when they appeared beside her name. But beauty, Marcus had learned, could hide rot better than almost anything. Victoria turned slightly away from him and opened her tablet. The screen lit her face in a pale glow as she scrolled through a presentation deck, marked Aurelian Air Global Partnership launch. Marcus saw it only because she angled the tablet carelessly, with the confidence of someone who assumed no one near her could understand what mattered. There were photographs of sleek aircraft, smiling families, runway models stepping through airport terminals, and Victoria herself standing beside the Aurelian Air Chief Executive Officer, beneath the words "The future of travel is for everyone." Marcus almost looked away, but one line caught his attention. Brand values alignment confirmed. He felt the sentence settle heavily in his chest. Confirmed? By whom? Her public relations team? Her lawyers? The same executives who cleaned language until truth could no longer leave fingerprints? Victoria tapped the screen harder than necessary, then opened a message thread. Her fingers moved quickly. Marcus did not read the words, but he saw the names. Daniel Pierce. Olivia. Board group. Damage control had already begun, though she still believed the damage was only inconvenience. A few rows behind them, the college student lowered his phone into his lap, pretending to adjust the brightness. Victoria noticed him in the reflection of the dark window. Her voice dropped, but not enough. "Young man," she said over her shoulder, "whatever you think you recorded, delete it." The student froze. He could not have been more than 20, with a university sweatshirt and nervous hands. Claire appeared almost instantly from the galley, her expression calm but firmer than before. "Mrs. Langford, please allow other passengers to enjoy the flight." Victoria gave her a polished smile that had no warmth in it. "I am protecting my privacy." Marcus turned a page in his notebook. "Privacy is what people ask for before they are seen clearly," he said. The words were quiet, but they reached her. She looked at him, then really looked, not with curiosity, but with irritation sharpened by fear. "You seem very pleased with yourself," she said. "No, ma'am," Marcus replied. "I am disappointed." That answer seemed to rob her of the argument she wanted. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then looked back at her tablet. The plane leveled above the cloud line, and sunlight spread suddenly across the cabin, bright and clean, touching the gold watch on Victoria's wrist, the worn edge of Marcus's notebook, the silver service cart waiting near the curtain. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of engines and distant air moving over metal. But Victoria's mind would not rest. She had a launch in less than 24 hours, an $80 million agreement, a morning interview, a private dinner with investors, and a daughter who had begged her for months to make this campaign mean something real. Olivia Langford believed in the words her mother used on stage. That was the problem with children, Victoria thought. They listened too closely. She glanced once more at Marcus, at his steady hand, at the notes he kept making, as if her behavior were not an insult but evidence. "What exactly do you do?" she asked, unable to stop herself. Marcus did not look up right away. He let the question sit between them until it lost its power. "I listen," he said at last. Victoria gave a small, dismissive breath. "That is not a profession." Marcus capped his pen and looked toward the white horizon beyond the glass. "Sometimes," he said, "it is the only thing that keeps people alive." Victoria looked away, annoyed by the weight of a sentence she did not understand. She did not know about Elena. She did not know about the hearing rooms, the buried memos, the families waiting for answers that never came. She did not know that Marcus Reed had spent years learning how powerful people sounded when they believed consequences were meant for someone else. And she did not know that every careless word she spoke was making tomorrow easier for him. The seatbelt sign turned off with a soft chime, but no one in row 2 seemed to loosen. Claire moved through first class with drinks, her service practiced and quiet, yet her eyes kept returning to Marcus and Victoria the way a person watches a glass balanced too close to the edge of a table. Victoria ordered sparkling water with lime and did not say please. Marcus asked for black coffee and thanked Claire by name, because he had noticed the small silver tag pinned above her scarf. That small kindness made Claire pause half a second longer than necessary. "Of course, Mr. Reed," she said. Victoria's fingers stilled around her glass. The name meant nothing to her yet, but the respect in Claire's voice bothered her. She looked at Marcus as if trying to find the hidden price tag that made him worthy of being addressed so carefully. Marcus took the coffee, feeling the warmth settle through the paper cup into his palm. He had promised himself not to engage again unless he had to. His job was not to punish Victoria. His job was to observe, to document, to tell the board whether the woman beside him represented the values Aurelian Eyre wanted painted across billboards from Los Angeles to New York. But the cabin was not a boardroom. It was smaller than that, more honest than that. There was nowhere for character to hide. A few minutes later, Claire returned with a folded blanket for the older woman across the aisle. As she leaned to offer it, Victoria lifted one hand sharply. "Excuse me. I asked for privacy. Why is that passenger still filming?" The college student behind them flushed, his phone now flat on his tray table. "I am not filming anymore," he said. "I was just texting my mom." "Do not lie to me," Victoria said. "People like you record anything for attention." The student swallowed, embarrassed in front of the cabin. Claire straightened. "Mrs. Langford, he has the right to use his phone in airplane mode as long as he follows crew instructions." Victoria gave a thin smile. "And I have the right not to be harassed on a flight I paid for." Marcus set his coffee down. The sound was small, but it cut cleanly through the tight air. "No one is harassing you," he said. Victoria turned on him, relief flashing in her face because now she had a target again. "This does not concern you." Marcus looked at the student, then at Claire, then back at Victoria. "It concerns everyone when someone uses power to make other people afraid to breathe." The words did not rise. They did not need to. Claire's shoulders lowered slightly, as if someone had finally placed a hand beneath the weight she had been carrying alone. Victoria stared at Marcus, color rising beneath her makeup. "You have no idea what power is." Marcus held her gaze. "I know exactly what it is. Power is what you do when nobody can force you to be decent." Across the aisle, the older woman with the blanket looked down at her hands. The man in the charcoal suit stopped pretending to read. The college student sat very still, his mouth parted around words he did not dare speak. Victoria leaned closer, keeping her voice controlled but hard. "You are enjoying this little performance." Marcus shook his head. "No, ma'am. I am asking you to stop making people smaller, just because you feel uncomfortable." That was the moment the plane gave a small, ordinary shudder as it crossed a pocket of rough air. Nothing dangerous, nothing unusual, but several passengers instinctively gripped their armrests. Claire reached for the seat beside her to steady herself. Marcus noticed the service cart beginning to roll half an inch from the galley latch. He stood just enough to catch the handle and guide it back before it moved into the aisle. "Careful," he said gently. Claire blinked, surprised. "Thank you." Victoria watched the quick, quiet movement, irritated by how natural it had been, how no one had asked Marcus to help and yet he had. He sat again, adjusted his notebook and took one slow breath. He had crossed the invisible line Victoria had drawn around him, not by raising his voice, not by claiming importance, but by protecting the dignity of people she had treated like obstacles. In the dim reflection of the window, Marcus saw her looking at him now with something different beneath her anger. Not respect. Not yet. But uncertainty. And for someone like Victoria Langford, uncertainty was the first crack in the wall. For the next hour, Victoria tried to make silence look like victory. She turned toward the window that was not hers, opened a fashion report she did not read, and kept her sparkling water balanced on the tray table as if the entire cabin could be disciplined by the stillness of her posture. But her phone, connected to the plane's Wi-Fi, would not let the moment die. First came a message from Daniel Pierce, her company attorney. Then 3 more from the board group. Then one from Olivia. "Mom, what happened on the plane?" Victoria stared at the words until they seemed to brighten against the screen. She opened Daniel's message first. "There is a short clip circulating. Do not engage online. Land and call me immediately." Her thumb hovered. A short clip. That meant angles, captions, strangers deciding what kind of woman she was from a few seconds of inconvenience. Her face warmed. Not from shame, not yet, but from the unbearable insult of being judged by people who had never built anything, never signed payroll checks, never carried a company through a recession. She glanced back at the college student. He was looking down, but his shoulders were tight. "You," she said. The single word cut through the cabin. Claire turned from the galley. Marcus did not move, though his eyes lifted from his notebook. The student looked up slowly. "Ma'am, I told you to delete it." His cheeks reddened. "I did not post anything." "Then who did?" Victoria demanded. "Mrs. Langford," Claire said, stepping closer. "Please lower your voice." Victoria's laugh came out thin and brittle. "Lower my voice? That boy violates my privacy, and you lecture me." The student looked humiliated now. His hands folded around his phone like he wished he could disappear into the seat. Marcus felt the old anger rise, not hot and wild but deep and heavy, the kind that came from watching someone powerful mistake fear for respect. He placed his pen on the notebook. "Leave him alone," he said. Victoria swung her gaze back to him. "You do not get to give instructions here." "Neither do you," Marcus replied. The cabin held its breath again. A businessman in the third row murmured something to his seatmate, and Victoria caught only enough to hear the word video. Her control slipped another inch. She lifted her phone, scrolling faster now, and there it was. 12 seconds. Her own cream coat. Her own voice. "I won't sit next to him." The caption beneath it was worse. "Luxury CEO forgets her inclusion speech at 30,000 feet. The clip had already been shared thousands of times. Victoria's lips parted. For the first time, she looked less like a woman issuing commands and more like someone hearing a door lock from the wrong side. "This is defamation," she whispered. Marcus looked at her screen, then back at her face. "No," he said quietly. "It is memory with witnesses." Claire's expression tightened, not with triumph but with sadness. She had served passengers for 18 years. She had seen grief, fear, arrogance, tenderness, and loneliness in the air, where strangers were forced to sit close enough to reveal themselves. She knew the difference between a mistake and a pattern. Victoria pressed the call button hard. The small light above her seat blinked. Claire was already standing there, but Victoria spoke as if summoning her from below. "I want the captain informed that I am being targeted." Claire folded her hands. "The captain is focused on operating the aircraft safely. I can document your concern after landing." "Document this," Victoria said, her voice shaking now. "I will make sure every one of you regrets how I was treated today." Something changed in Marcus's face then. Not anger. Not surprise. A final disappointment, clean and quiet. He opened his notebook and wrote again. "Retaliation threat toward crew." Victoria saw the movement. "Are you writing about me?" she asked. Marcus closed the notebook, his palm resting on the cover. "I am writing down what happened." "And who exactly are you to do that?" she snapped. The question hung there, sharp and dangerous, almost touching the truth. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. The engines hummed beneath them. Sunlight thinned across the aisle. "Someone who learned a long time ago," he said, "that if people do not write the truth down, powerful people rewrite it by morning." Victoria had no answer. Her phone buzzed again. Olivia's name appeared on the screen a second time, followed by another message she could not bring herself to open. Around them, the flight continued toward New York, steady and indifferent, while the life Victoria had polished for decades began to loosen, thread by thread, in the quiet blue light of her own screen. The cabin lights dimmed as Flight 218 moved east through the late afternoon, and the world beyond Marcus Reed's window became a wide silver silence. Clouds stretched beneath the wing like torn cotton, soft at the edges, endless and untouched by the small cruelties people carried inside pressurized rooms. For the first time since boarding, no one spoke. Victoria sat rigid beside him, her phone face down now, though it kept vibrating against the tray table in short, nervous pulses. Each buzz seemed to travel through the leather armrests between them. Marcus did not look at it. He had seen enough screens turn human pain into spectacle. He knew the clip would spread. He knew people would argue over it, defend it, condemn it, laugh at it, slow it down, crop it, turn her sentence into a headline before the wheels touched the runway. But the quiet around him did not feel like victory. It felt like the moment after thunder, when the air still remembers the sound. He looked down at his left hand. The plain silver wedding band caught a thin line of sunlight. Elena had chosen it at a small jewelry store in Decatur, laughing because he kept looking at the price tags instead of the rings. She had told him that love was not measured by shine. It was measured by whether a person stayed gentle when life gave them every reason not to. Marcus turned the ring slowly with his thumb. 3 years had passed, and there were still moments when grief arrived without warning, not as a storm, but as a familiar hand on his shoulder. He remembered the hearing room after the accident, the executives in dark suits, the careful words, the way responsibility became fog when lawyers entered. He remembered sitting behind families who wanted only the truth and watching powerful men offer sympathy polished clean of accountability. That was when he learned the cost of silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence people purchase when they have enough money to make pain inconvenient. The notebook in his lap opened to a fresh page. At the top, beneath the formal headings and clean margins, he had written observations from the flight. Not opinions. Not insults. Not revenge. Just what happened. What was said. Who was threatened. Who was made smaller. His pen hovered, then stopped. For a moment he did not write. He looked across the aisle at Claire, who was kneeling beside the older passenger, adjusting the air vent with patient hands. He looked back at the college student, who was staring out his own window, shaken by a confrontation he had never asked to be part of. He looked at Victoria, no longer glowing with certainty, but trapped inside a fear that had finally found her own name on it. Marcus could have felt satisfied. A younger version of him might have. But Elena's voice rose in him, quiet as breath against glass. Do not let cruel people teach you cruelty. He closed his eyes for a second. Beneath the floor the engines held. Their steady note, thousands of pounds of metal carried by laws no passenger could see and few truly respected. Flight was trust made physical. Every bolt, every inspection, every honest report mattered because lives depended on people doing the right thing when no audience was watching. Maybe dignity worked the same way. Maybe a society stayed in the air only because ordinary people, tired people, wounded people still chose not to become what had hurt them. Marcus opened his eyes and wrote one final line on the page. Character observed under pressure. Then he capped the pen. Outside, the sun lowered toward the horizon, turning the clouds gold at their edges. Victoria's phone buzzed again, longer this time. She lifted it with trembling fingers and read whatever message had arrived. Marcus did not ask. He only watched the light move over the window, over his ring, over the notebook that had once belonged to a woman who believed kindness was not weakness, but strength with its hands open. And somewhere ahead, beyond the clouds and the soft curve of the earth, New York waited with its glass towers, its locked conference rooms, and a morning that would ask everyone on that plane who they had truly been when no one could pretend not to see. Morning arrived in New York with rain tapping softly against the glass walls of Aurelian Air's headquarters, turning the city beyond the 38th floor into a blur of gray streets, yellow taxis, and silver rooftops. Victoria Langford stepped out of the private elevator at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the partnership meeting was scheduled to begin, dressed in a white tailored suit chosen to look calm under pressure. Her makeup was exact. Her hair was smooth. Her smile had been practiced in the back seat of the car while Daniel Pierce, her attorney, spoke in a low voice beside her about statements, liability, and controlling the narrative. But the lobby had not looked at her the way it used to. The receptionist greeted her politely, then looked down too quickly. 2 junior executives near the security desk stopped speaking as she passed. A television mounted above the waiting area showed a morning news panel discussing a blurred image from an airplane cabin, and although the sound was low, Victoria recognized her own cream coat before the screen changed. She kept walking. Daniel leaned close and whispered, "Let me lead. Apologize only if they force it. Do not volunteer anything." Victoria gave the smallest nod, but her throat felt dry. 24 hours earlier, she had believed the world could be arranged by tone, money, and a well-placed threat. Now every hallway seemed to contain a closed door she no longer controlled. At the end of the corridor, double glass doors opened into the main boardroom. The room was long, bright, and cold, with a polished table reflecting the ceiling lights like still water. Aurelian Air executives sat on both sides, their tablets closed, their faces unreadable. At the far end stood a large screen displaying the campaign title she had helped approve, The future of travel is for everyone. For one precious second, Victoria almost steadied herself. Then she saw Marcus Reed. He was not near the wall. He was not waiting with assistance. He was seated beside the chairman, Thomas Caldwell, with a navy folder in front of him and Elena's old leather notebook resting to his right. He wore a dark suit now, simple and perfectly fitted, but his face was the same face from seat to a calm, tired, impossible to move. Victoria stopped so abruptly Daniel nearly walked into her. The room noticed. Marcus did not smile. He did not look surprised. He simply met her eyes with the quiet recognition of a man watching someone arrive at a truth she should have reached much earlier. Thomas Caldwell stood. "Mrs. Langford, Mr. Pierce. Thank you for coming." His voice was formal, not warm. Victoria forced herself forward. "Thomas, before we begin, I want to address the unfortunate misunderstanding from yesterday." Marcus lowered his gaze to the folder, and somehow that small movement made the word misunderstanding collapse in the air. Thomas did not sit. "There was no misunderstanding," he said. "There was conduct. There was documentation. And there was context." Daniel placed his briefcase on the table. "With respect, online clips rarely provide context." Thomas looked toward Marcus. "That is why we hired Mr. Reed." The room became very still. Victoria's eyes moved from Thomas to Marcus, then to the folder, then back again. "Hired him for what?" she asked, though the answer was already beginning to form with terrible clarity. Marcus opened the folder. His voice, when it came, was the same steady voice that had crossed the aisle of the airplane without needing to rise. "Independent ethics and safety adjacent risk review for the proposed Langford Couture partnership. I was asked to evaluate whether the public values of this campaign matched the private behavior of the brand representing it." Victoria's face lost color beneath the careful makeup. Daniel went silent. Thomas picked up a remote from the table. The screen behind him changed. The campaign title disappeared, replaced by the first frozen frame of the airplane video. Victoria's own face looked back at her, mouth slightly open, eyes fixed on the man beside the window as if he were a stain on the seat. Then her voice filled the boardroom, clear enough for every polished surface to carry it back to her. "I won't sit next to him." No one moved. No one defended her. The sound ended, but the silence afterward was worse. Marcus turned one page in his report. "The incident itself is not isolated," he said. "It is consistent with documented employee complaints, settlement patterns, and leadership behavior that creates reputational risk for Aurelian Air." Victoria stared at him as if he had changed shape in front of her. Yesterday, she had demanded that he be moved. Today, he was the reason nobody in the room would move to save her. Thomas Caldwell did not raise his voice when he ended the partnership, and that made the decision feel even more final. He folded his hands on the polished table, looked at Victoria with the tired patience of a man who had already given the matter more mercy than it deserved, and said, "Aurelian Air cannot attach its name to a campaign about dignity while ignoring evidence that dignity is treated as a costume by its partner." The words moved through the boardroom like cold air beneath a door. Daniel Pierce began speaking at once, offering phrases that had been polished for emergencies: disproportionate reaction, incomplete narrative, opportunity for repair, mutual benefit. But no one reached for a pen. No one opened the contract. The $80 million agreement lay in front of Victoria, printed, tabbed, and unsigned, suddenly as useless as a boarding pass after the plane had left. Marcus sat quietly while the executives discussed next steps. He did not interrupt. He did not look pleased. That unsettled Victoria more than if he had. She had known enemies who enjoyed watching her lose. She had known rivals who smiled with their teeth. Marcus did neither. He watched the room with a kind of sadness that made her feel, for the first time in years, not attacked but revealed. Her phone vibrated again and again inside her handbag. By the time the meeting ended, the news had already moved faster than her lawyers. A major department store paused all Langford Couture promotions. 2 celebrity ambassadors announced they were reconsidering their relationship with the brand. The board called an emergency session for noon. Investors wanted distance. Employees wanted statements. The world Victoria had built out of glass, silk, lighting, and carefully chosen words had begun to crack in public view. She walked out of the boardroom on legs that felt unfamiliar. Daniel followed, still talking, but his voice sounded far away, muffled by the thick carpet and the blood rushing in her ears. Near the elevators, her phone rang. Olivia. Victoria stared at her daughter's name as if it were the one call she had no strategy for. She answered. Liv, sweetheart, I can explain. There was a pause on the other end, and in that pause Victoria heard something worse than anger. She heard disappointment. I watched the video, Olivia said. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of someone trying not to break. I watched it 3 times because I kept hoping I had misunderstood. Victoria closed her eyes. It was a stressful moment. People are taking it out of context. No, Mom, Olivia said. That is what hurts. It looked exactly like the context. Victoria's hand tightened around the phone. Through the glass wall she could see Marcus, gathering his notebook and folder inside the boardroom. He moved slowly, respectfully, as if even the end of her deal deserved not to be treated carelessly. Olivia continued, You taught me how to speak about dignity at galas. You taught me where to stand for cameras, what words to use, how to make people believe we cared. But you never learned how to live it when nobody was applauding. Victoria swallowed. The hallway lights reflected in the marble floor beneath her, bright and merciless. I am your mother, she whispered. I know, Olivia said, and her voice trembled then. That is why I needed you to be better. The call ended without goodbye. For a moment, Victoria remained standing with the silent phone pressed to her ear. Daniel stopped talking. Even he seemed to understand that no legal statement could repair the sound of a daughter losing respect for her mother. When Marcus stepped into the hallway, Victoria turned toward him. The old instinct rose in her first. Negotiate, persuade, recover, survive. Mr. Reed, she said, and the name felt strange in her mouth now that she knew what it carried. He stopped. She walked closer, not with confidence this time, but with the careful steps of someone approaching a mirror she had avoided for too long. Please, she said. If you tell them I made a mistake, if you say I was tired, overwhelmed, anything, they might reconsider. I can issue a public apology. I can fund a foundation. I can make this right. Marcus looked at her for a long second. Behind him, rain traced thin lines down the glass, blurring the city into gray light. An apology is not a strategy, he said quietly. It is a wound you finally agreed to look at. Victoria's lips parted, but no defense came. Marcus's voice stayed gentle, which made the truth land harder. You are not losing everything because I wrote down what happened. You are losing what was built on people not saying it out loud. For the first time, Victoria looked at him without trying to place him beneath her. She saw the steady eyes, the worn notebook, the wedding band, the dignity she had mistaken for weakness because it had not announced itself with money. I am sorry, she said, and it came out small, almost childlike. Marcus nodded once. Then let sorry change you when there is nothing left to save. He walked toward the elevators, leaving her in the quiet corridor with the unsigned contract in Daniel's briefcase, her daughter's silence in her hand, and the terrible understanding that the seat she had refused had never been the problem. The problem had been the part of herself that believed some people were not worthy of sitting beside her at all. Marcus Reed took the elevator down alone. The doors closed with a soft metallic sigh, sealing away the 38th floor, the unsigned contract, the emergency phone calls, and the woman who had finally run out of people to command. For the first few seconds he stood still beneath the pale elevator light, Elena's notebook tucked under one arm, his reflection faint in the brushed steel wall. He looked older than he had the day before, not because of victory, but because telling the truth always carried weight, even when it was necessary. The elevator passed floor after floor in silence. 31, 22, 15. Each number blinked amber, then vanished. In the lobby, the morning rain had softened to a mist that clung to the revolving doors and streaked the windows in thin silver lines. People moved around him with coffee cups, briefcases, rolling bags, and the restless hurry of Manhattan. A few recognized him from the video now spreading across their phones, but no one stopped him. One security guard, a black man with gray at his temples, gave Marcus a small nod as he passed. It was not applause. It was not celebration. It was something quieter, older, and deeper, I saw. Marcus returned the nod and kept walking. Outside, the city smelled of wet pavement, exhaust, roasted coffee from a cart on the corner, and rain lifting off warm concrete. Yellow taxis slid along the curb. A bus sighed at the stoplight. Somewhere above the avenue, an airplane cut through the low clouds, its sound distant and steady. Marcus paused beneath the awning and opened Elena's notebook one last time. The page from the flight stared back at him. Character observed under pressure. Below it, his final line waited. In dark ink. He touched the edge of the paper with his thumb, then closed the cover carefully. Across the lobby behind him, Victoria sat on a low leather bench near the glass wall. Daniel Pierce was gone. Her assistants were gone. Her phone rested dark in her lap. No longer a weapon, no longer a shield, just a piece of glass reflecting a face she did not seem ready to recognize. The white suit that had looked so sharp in the morning now seemed too bright for the weather, too clean for the truth it had walked through. She saw Marcus through the glass before he stepped fully outside. For a moment their eyes met. Yesterday, she had looked at him and seen an inconvenience. On the plane she had seen a threat. In the boardroom she had seen consequence. Now, with the city moving around them and nothing left to bargain with, she seemed to see only a man. A man with a history. A man with grief. A man with work to do. A man she should have been able to sit beside without making the world prove his worth to her. Her lips moved, but no sound reached him through the glass. Maybe she said sorry again. Maybe she said nothing at all. Marcus did not turn away cruelly. He did not raise his chin. He did not smile. He simply placed one hand over the notebook, gave her the smallest nod, and stepped into the rain. The mist touched his face and gathered on his shoulders, darkening the fabric of his suit. He walked east toward the avenue unhurried, the soles of his shoes making soft sounds against the wet stone. Behind him, Victoria remained seated in the enormous lobby, surrounded by marble, glass, and all the expensive silence money could buy. No cameras followed her now. No audience waited for the right words. There was only the empty space beside her on the bench, wide enough for another person, wide enough for the truth, wide enough for the life she had spent refusing to understand. Marcus reached the curb as the crosswalk light changed. People moved with him, strangers under umbrellas, shoulders close, nobody more entitled to the sidewalk than anyone else. He looked up once at the low gray sky. Somewhere beyond those clouds, aircraft were lifting and landing, held in the air. By trust, by discipline, by unseen hands doing their work honestly. He thought of Elena, of his mother's starch-scented hands, of his father naming wet streets from behind a bus wheel, of every quiet person who had ever been told they did not belong in a seat they had earned. Then the light turned white. Marcus crossed with the crowd, his notebook under his arm, his steps steady through the rain. He did not need to watch Victoria lose everything. The lesson had already found her. And in the soft hush after the storm, justice made no speech at all.